Great. Thank you so much, Dave, and thank you everyone for joining in our first of two trainings. This is going to be our basic orientation within the Spend Intelligence side of SpendHQ. And I will start sharing my screen here momentarily, and it should start flowing through in everyone's webinar. So bear with me while it starts queuing up. Now, as we're going through today's training session, I really want to make sure everyone's able to walk away with some basic orientation knowledge of how the SpendHQ platform works, how to navigate through various modules and functionality. And of course, we will be getting much more into the weeds of some of the really powerful analytics platform visualizations in the second of the training sessions. And I just started sharing my screen, and you will notice that my browser should now pop up. I am sharing Google Chrome, which is, of course, logged into SpendHQ at our URL, that is secure2.spendhq.com. And I will note that we are using Google Chrome because that is indeed our preferred browser when utilizing the SpendHQ platform. Really, as long as you're not using Microsoft Edge or Internet Explorer, which I think Microsoft actually officially stopped supporting in the past year or so, you should have a great experience, but Google Chrome is our preferred browser of choice. One more housekeeping things when it comes to the browser. I'm just going to go up here in the top right-hand side of the screen. You will see that I have my zoom ratio positioned at about a 75% level. This will be something you want to toggle based on your own instance, your own device you are using. Since SpendHQ is a web-connected platform, depending if you're looking at SpendHQ on a tablet device or, of course, a desktop with a larger bit of screen real estate, make sure you flex your zoom ratio to what makes sense for you. It will be dependent on that device. And in this case, about 75% is about best for me on this particular desktop. So those are kind of the housekeeping pieces. Let's start walking through the SpendHQ platform. I always like to start here with the orientation. What am I seeing on the left-hand side of the screen and the top-hand side, which are always going to be visible no matter where I am in the platform. Now, on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see I'm moving my mouse over here on the left. Let's look at my module navigation pane. This is where I can see my Spend Intelligence modules very, very quickly. And in fact, I just want to call out, I do have performance as the PPM or legacy Parangusta ability to flex between the two platforms also should exist in your instance of SpendHQ SI. All of my module navigation pane will forever be visible here on the left-hand side. So think of this almost like the home screen on your iPhone. You're able to easily see where you want to navigate through other areas of the tool. I also like to bring your eyes down to the bottom left-hand side of the screen as well. Some of these will be spending more time in the second of trainings, but do note that this also gives some additional visibility and power of SpendHQ. For example, pulling out custom exports direct from SpendHQ and the queue for recategorization and renormalization, two functionalities we'll be talking through in today's training, also exists there in the bottom left. So on the left-hand side, that module navigation pane is always going to be visible. The last thing I'll just call out, you'll see a small arrow icon at the top. If I give that a quick click, notice you're giving less real estate there to my modules and more to the data that's being displayed in that particular module you're accessing. This is very useful if you're on a smaller device, maybe a laptop with a smaller screen. I do recommend just knowing that is one tool in your toolbox to make it a little bit easier to navigate throughout the platform with that little arrow icon with that vertical line. Now here in the top of the screen, you'll also see we have SpendHQ notated along with this search bar. This is a great area to drop in individual vendors or subcategories if you want to gravitate to one specific segment. We'll be showing that functionality throughout the training session. But I want to draw our eyes a little bit further over from that search bar. That's here in the top right-hand side of the screen where my power filter, date picker, and this small question mark icon that we'll be coming back to later on in the training towards the tail end, as well as here at the beginning, and that is our help or support center. In fact, if I give that a quick click, you'll notice that I navigate immediately over to our Fresh Desk portal. This is a great area to be able to see our knowledge base, so that any tickets, if you're having any issues, and sign up for additional live trainings. So not just do we have these recorded training sessions we're walking through here, but also if you'd like to have additional training with our support staff, we have that available right here in your knowledge base. I would also like to just point out when I flop over here to knowledge base at the top of the screen. This is almost like the user manual of SpendHQ. So all the content we'll be covering in these training sessions. We also have a robust build out of how to utilize the system, what exists in each of our modules, and really just a great tips and tricks that should reemphasize many of the concepts we're talking through in today's training session. I fully recommend all here in today's webinar. Also make sure to use that support area in the top right-hand side of SpendHQ. And please use that knowledge base. It almost even helps to have it open on a separate tab when you're using SpendHQ with the first couple of instances to always have that strong base of how to use the system listed out there for you. Now, with those housekeeping elements taken care of, let's start navigating throughout the SpendHQ platform itself. Now, SpendHQ Spend Intelligence modules are all built on the spend data that we've been working for the past couple of months with the team of the spend data that previously, of course, was fed over into Jagger. Within this data set, we have a lot of dimensions that we can use to flex and slice and dice through the data. Currently, I'm looking at all of the CSU spend data in today's demonstration. We'll also be specifying how we can refine that list down to individual campuses as we start navigating throughout the tool. You'll start navigating through SpendHQ at your home module or home screen. So really great way to be able to see at a top line view how many dollars are actually being transacted in this point in time, noticing that this will be correlated to what your power filter and your date picker are specifying. So in this case, if I have 12 months visible in my date picker, and I can even pop the hood there by clicking on that date picker in the top right, you'll see we have spend data going all the way back through 2020. I'm looking at the 12-month range of August up through July of 2023. Also, please note, we'll be catching up the spend data all the way through July of 2024 here in the next week. So now that we're finishing up the implementation, we'll be transitioning that additional spend data here with that follow-up 7 months in the next week or so. This data will also be refreshed every month going forward. So this will not be stale information. Keep in mind, this should always be within a month or so of those books being closed. Now, also here in this home screen, you'll see we have perspective of the overall supplier volume, average supplier spend, and these are all data points representative of a full data set and that 12-month range. I'll scroll a little bit further down, just calling out that we have a visualization of the top areas of spend increasing from both the level 1 category level as well as the level 2 subcategory, even the vendor-based level. I like using the home screen for this particular area because seeing those top areas of spend change in a period of time can really be telling and helpful for the team interacting with your spend information and then, of course, honing into specific segments. Just as one example, say if I want to look at one particular area, I can drill into one subcategory with one click from my home screen and notice SpendHQ will automatically navigate me to that specific module, in this case, the categories module of that one area of spend. So a lot of natural ways to gravitate towards different points of information without having to actually navigate to them at the module navigation. To get back to where I was, just click on home and you'll be reverted right back to where you were at that top line view. One more theme I also want to hone in on here in the home screen is the dimension as well as the self-service and spend breakdown visual views. The spend by dimension here in the center of the screen will have one reoccurring theme we'll see throughout the tool. That is the dimension dropdown. In the top right-hand side of that spend by dimension, notice this allows for me to immediately make a toggle of where I'd like to see that spend transpiring, noticing that any of the underlying data points that we have in your spend data, you can slice and dice your spend. In this case, I flipped it over here to campus. Let's say I only want to look at Cal State LA as well as Cal State Northridge. Well, if I deselect all my legend at the bottom, I make those two selections right here, and notice that data set updates very, very rapidly, just those two areas. So that spend by dimension will give you immediate perspective of any dimension and seeing how that transpires over the date range you've selected. Last areas of note at the bottom of the screen, we have a spend breakdown, which will give my category and subcategory view at a top line view. And also this self-service, very, very important for us to know, not just for today, but also into the future. This is where we're able to know how many areas of feedback the team has built in as far as rules are concerned that have been recommended to be changed from categorization or are pending to be changed, as it is important to know that your admin users must approve those recommendations for a shift. So think, for example, you have a vendor you'd like to move from one subcategory to another or build out a various rule set for that particular criteria. They will be able to review and confirm those changes once those are fed in with the self-service rules, which I'll be showing how to utilize in today's training session. So this is a top-line view of the home screen, some of the areas that we're visualizing. Let's start navigating through the other core modules of SpendHQ here naturally with my module navigation on the left-hand side. I'm going to start off here with my spend profile, going here to details. Now, starting off here with the spend profile details, we'll notice a couple of reoccurring themes from our home screen, which is certainly by design. First and foremost, you'll see we have these billboards at the top of the screen that give those similar data points that are very useful. And notice this little eye icon on the top right-hand side can always be utilized if you want additional detail of what's shown in that billboard. In the case of looking at spend data, I can actually see the dollar value that's being transacted against in that range of time based on my parameters. Or in other areas, we'll give you perspective of a calculation if you're actually seeing a calculator or formula-based field. At a top-line view, my $3 billion in the past 12 months have been categorized into 23 level 1 categories, and underneath that, 351 procurement level subcategories. So this means if I were to go out to market in a particular good or service, all that spend that's shared in that area should be in a similar space. So it's really giving me the top view of what's going on if I were to go out to market in that particular vertical. Think, for example, office supplies. That would be a great example of subcategory underneath our corporate spend. Going down here in the center of the screen, we have my Earth breakdown, or that Earth chart. But once again, in the center of the screen, we have two drop downs. It's a little bit different than that dimension picker we saw back on the home screen. That's because this allows for me to use those categories as the basis of that drill down. I'm going to look at my construction equipment here in my demonstration today.
Brandon, excuse me. Sorry, it's Bess. Two questions came up in the Q&A. Just wanted to acknowledge them. The first one is from Sergio. He's not seeing Pomona listed as a campus for selection, and I'm wondering, maybe we just need to revisit that at the end of the session, toward the end.
Okay, I can look very quickly.
Okay.
Let's take a look here. We do have Pomona. Yes, Cal Poly Pomona is in the spend data.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks, Brandon. And the second one is, can you go over the unaddressable category?
Yes, of course. So the unaddressable subcategory, and you'll see this especially within the compliance module a little bit later in today's demonstration, usually areas that are typically not addressable by procurement. So if I were to jump into addressable, you'll see things like union contributions, taxes and fees, or when money's moved from one campus to another that doesn't actually relate to a good or service being spent. That's really what you'll see in this home in most traditional cases. Ordinarily, you should see only segments of spend that procurement can't really make a big driving change in the unaddressable subcategory. Actually, here's some examples of about half of those subcategories when I drill down in that segment. Great question. To navigate back out of that drill down into my unaddressable, also note I can click in that table, go back to category, and I'm back down to the full top line view. So as we're going through today's demo, I want to look at one area of spend, and that's my construction and equipment. And there's two ways that I can really gravitate towards that piece of information. One, as you saw in my table at the bottom, I can select that individual level 1 category, or I can use this drop down in the center of the screen and say, hey, I want to look at construction equipment, and you'll see all those spend values immediately update. Now that I made this first layer of change, let's say I also want to get perspective of certain campuses. I don't want to see all top line spend, but rather it's important for me in my analysis here, I only want to see a subset. That's where our power filter comes into play, which we already got a little sample of when I started drilling into making sure we had Pomona spend data. Let's go into our power filter creation process by clicking on power filter. You'll notice I have a handful of power filters we've already created as we went through the implementation go live over the past couple of months, but I want to create, in this case, a fresh power filter and show how that functionality is being utilized. To do so, click on Create Filter in the top left-hand side. This will allow for me to begin that filter process. It's important to note that a title and description are useful to input here because it's not just great for you as a user to know what that power filter includes or excludes, but if you were to share your power filter with others across the organization, this is really, really helpful for them to know, well, what did you actually include or exclude in this data set? So they want to make sure that they know what they're being shared or they're experiencing. I'm going to call this my campus subset. For my description, I'm just going to call this one demo. When I click create in the bottom right-hand side, I begin the filter creation process with effectively two primary buckets of how this filter will be generated. One of those is inclusions, one of those is exclusions. This may be your own personal preference of how you know you'd like to be able to look at your spend data. In this case, I want to look at a campus-based drill down. So I want to include only a subset of my campuses. If I click Add Inclusions, SpendHQ will prompt you, please specify what dimension you'd like in your data to be utilized. And notice that all these various fields are coming through your raw data alongside the normalization and categorization of your spend data that SpendHQ has done to that spend information. But in this case, say I want one particular field, just like Google, I can type in CAM, and now I see campus from that much larger list in all my various dimensions. When I click Next in the bottom right-hand side, we'll see from there, here's all of my campuses alongside the corresponding spend that that data set has. This is a really important place for me to call out as well. This spend data is the total spend that we have received for that particular campus. So when you're going through the power filter creation process, you're not only looking at the subset that your date picker up there in the top right-hand side may have shown. This means that we have received, going back all the way through 2020, $520 million from San Luis Obispo's campus. In this demonstration, I'm going to look just at a small subset and select a few campuses here: Long Beach, San Luis Obispo, and San Jose State. Notice in the green on the right-hand side, those campuses are now illuminated as I am now only allowing the inclusion of these options. And when I click over here, include to filter, notice here at the top of the screen, I can immediately know that 1.5 out of the 8.6 billion that we've analyzed across the CSU going back through 2020 is going to meet the criteria that I've specified. I also really want to emphasize here for all, do not feel nervous to only have one inclusion or one rule. You can use as many layers as you would like in each of these cases for how that data is being displayed. If you only want to look at certain departments, for example, at those campuses, you can, of course, go into that department name and then look at that dimensioning of what's important for your analysis. There's a lot of horsepower here to allow for you to specify, here's what's important for me in my analysis. And keep in mind, these power filters can be user-specific or be shared. So you can turn that full aggregate spend data into that small subset that's really important for your own work very, very rapidly. I'm not going to add any additional inclusions for this example, but I also would like to call out the exclusion piece is also just as important. If I've included these three campuses, I may also find I want to exclude a particular data source. If I go to my data source dropdown, in this case, I can very quickly see if I have spend data for those other instances, it will also be dimensioned. So really, really powerful way for you to refine. Here's what's important. Here's what's not important. Here's what I don't want to have viewed in my analysis when interacting with the data. And as you become more comfortable over time with those dimensions, it's become more natural. So you're not scrolling through this full list, but rather you're able to immediately say, I want to look at my GL accounts. I want these 5 different GLs, and of course, specify it in that manner. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and click on capital construction for these top 3 instances. Click exclude from filter. And look at that, we've now taken out $500 million in that spend data with one click. Last things to call out in my power filter creation process, never feel like you're locked in based on what you specified for your power filter. Now, what does that mean? Well, if I would like to remove an exclusion, notice that each of these instances has a small X icon, so I can very quickly click X and remove that particular filter. Or I can remove that entire rule. Click on remove all. That takes off that entire rule from my data set and returns me back to that campus specification instead. And in the top right-hand side, before I actually commit this power filter into the data set, notice you can either remove it with that trash can icon, share it to other users by clicking on that share icon, and this will let me drop that power filter for any of the other users here at the CSU. Your admin users also have the ability to create what we call restricted power filters, which give that user access to only a smaller subset of the data if that's appropriate for that particular use case.
Quick question, Brandon.
Yes.
Filter question. Lori is asking, can you filter by small business or DVBE?
Yes, a great question. So actually we are in the next week or so finalizing the diversity structure we're implementing for the CSU and how that data will be enriched, but you will be able to specify based on that criteria if you want to look just at your small business, minority-owned business, etc., for any of the ESG flags.
Thank you.
So with my 3 campuses that I've now applied, I'm going to favorite my power filter with that little star icon and click activate. That favoriting is going to make it much easier for me to see this in the future and always gravitate towards it. You may find that you have a subset of power filters you're always utilizing, and you can do so with that little star. What I like about this too is this gives me $1.5 billion perspective of included spend, how much is being filtered, and how much is crucially being excluded. So I pulled out 7.1 of that 8.3 just in my 3 campus view. Now, how does this actually look when I go into SpendHQ? Let's go back to my spend profile where we were earlier. You'll notice, well, my goodness, my spend totals have meaningfully decreased. That's because in the past 12 months, only 502 million meets that criteria. And when I gravitate or navigate anywhere else in the tool, these power filters are applied. So if I'm here in spend profile, if I'm looking at my spend data over in the strategy module, anywhere throughout the tool, this power filter is applied. And if you ever have a question, am I looking at the full data set? I can tell you the answer is likely going to be, is your power filter lit up in green? This means that your power filter is engaged, and you can even hover over it. It'll tell you which power filter is currently on based on the name. And what's very, very impressive, I can click on that power icon and immediately you are telling SpendHQ to rebuild the visualizations with now the full data set as opposed to that drill down based on where you're currently viewing the tool. So notice I'm still viewing at that subset of that construction data and the subcategory, but I flipped it from that smaller area spend to 878. And with one click, you can engage or disengage that particular criteria. Last things I want to show in spend profile, just like we saw earlier, always know you can gravitate towards different areas of SpendHQ very, very quickly. Let's say you want to look at certain suppliers or areas of data. Well, let's say I want to look at my building construction spend, give that a click. I'll see my top line view of my largest suppliers. I want to look at my Clark Construction Group, California. With one click, you'll see that individual vendor. And this is also where you'll be able to recommend recategorization, potentially recommend a renormalization of that vendor. Do I want to flag this vendor as preferred because we have a contract currently in place with them? All of these can be flagged here in the top of the screen. Note that all 3 of these, once again, do require admin to approve. This will apply to all spend data in your spend cube, and all other users will see those changes once they are committed. But you can still favorite a vendor if you find yourself always gravitating back to that particular vendor, or that's really important for your own needs in your day-to-day. You can make that subset that is indeed user specific. And one other area to call out, this create opportunity in the top right-hand side will immediately navigate you over to the PPM instance to start the creation of projects in the actual savings tracking tool. So great area and module integration as you're navigating through spend data in the SI or SpendHQ side before you go to SpendHQ's PPM platform for those opportunity and savings trackings. In this example today, I just really quickly want to show how do we go about recategorization and recommending those changes. Well, for here with Clark Construction, there are 2 areas that you'll always be able to recommend for how you'd like to have a recategorization be processed. The first one is a one-to-one change. Let's say I want to move Clark Construction Group, California, from building construction over to maintenance, just for the sake of today's demonstration. Clicking on that little pencil icon to the right-hand side will allow for you to make that one-to-one rule. And then in this dropdown, you'll see that I'm able to very quickly query in. This is actually building repair and maintenance related. And now that will become the base rule based on the recommendation. This is a one-to-one change, is going to change all the spend for that vendor from one procurement subcategory to another. I will prompt the admin to approve it for where to click on update subcategory. The other option you have when going through recategorization recommendations is going to be creating additional rules. And that's going to be done through this add additional subcategory area in the bottom right-hand side of the screen. What's really great about this is you can add multiple rules in this case. So let's say when I put in maintenance here, building repair and maintenance can be added in, and it will prompt you for a criteria of where this is the case. In this instance, maybe at one campus, this spend is always going to be related to maintenance. Well, we wouldn't see that in the top line view of the spend, but maybe San Diego State knows that this is always going to be related to maintenance. They do no construction work there at SDSU. Well, go ahead and click on this piece. And you click add subcategories and slice out that spend for San Diego State. Really a lot of horsepower between those two areas of flexibility. And notice you can add in additional criteria as you'd like to layer those in. So you're going to look at certain GL accounts. Of course, this is also permissible. You can go through those different GLs. And what I really like about this area, you can type in what is prevalent across multiple cases to make this easier for what you're actually adding in for those rules. Notice you also have the equal or do not equal functionality when going through this multiple layered recategorization. So that's the recategorization rule submission process. Also want to show the renormalization process. By clicking on this renormalization, you'll see we can see the two different areas that we've normalized on our side, Clark construction spend across all the raw data sets we've received from CSU. Then in this case, let's say I want to move Clark Construction Group CALP to a different vendor. Well, this is exactly how you'd be able to do it. You can specify which one you want to peel back, and you can go down and select from the other normalized vendor names what this is actually related towards. I will say this is much less of a functionality that's being utilized. It's much less common for that renormalization need. But if you start peeling back the spend and seeing some instances where normalization needs to be flipped, this is how you go through that process. And always remember, your admin must also approve these changes when submitted. Last layer here is the make supplier preferred rule. This is going to make that supplier preferred for that particular subcategory they have spend in. Notice they'll also be prompted to create a start and end date. Traditionally, we like to put these in the contract term range. Let's say we have a 2-year contract we've made from February of 24 up through February of 26. You can also add in advanced criteria here in the center of the screen based on any other dimension. So if maybe one campus has an agreement they're putting into place, you can absolutely do that. In this case, I might say Chico State, for example, has as a preferred supplier. You can go about that process. Notice that add criteria can continue to be added in for different rules if needed. So those are some of the flags that all users have the ability to submit for admin for approval with a vendor. Let's go back to where we're the spend profile. We're going to pick up the pace a little bit as we start navigating through other submodules and giving some baseline functionality of what exists in each of these various views of the tool. Let's pop over here to the compare submodule underneath spend profile. Now, this is one of my favorite areas to recommend. I have two really important cuts of data I want to see overlaid and how they're actually shifting over time. Well, in this case, maybe I want to see a perspective of my campus spend broken out by category. Same as we saw earlier, I can select in that dropdown, give me that layer of visualization. And these two functions, so that campus and that category, now allow for me to see very, very rapidly, hey, here's my top spend campuses from top to bottom on my y-axis. And across the x side, we'll see perspective of how much spend goes into each of these buckets based on my slicer. So very rapidly, I can see San Diego State has that 156 million of construction equipment cost at that top line level 1 category. You'll also see very rapidly in this breakdown within the compare module where it says category, this will give you the top 10 of that particular area of the view they're the first visualization, and we automatically roll up the rest into other. So if you don't see all the full category lists, not to fear, they are there. Just in our visualization in the tool, we do aggregate that tail into the other bucket, depending on the visualization. You can also search this table very, very rapidly. Let's say I want to look at Fresno. I can just type in Fresno there in the top right, and now I see Fresno State's breakdown right here. We see they're 4% of the total spend, and I can look at all those top line views of spend very quickly. Down the bottom of this view, scroll a bit further down, a couple reoccurring themes to call out. One of those would be the CSV or XLS export function. This does exist in multiple areas of SpendHQ where you can pull this data out, bring it into Excel. You can share it to others that may not have access to SpendHQ. Just a useful thing to have in your toolkit if you need to use this data somewhere else. And in this compare breakdown at the bottom of the screen, you also have the time series version of that same data set. So you can see how that spend is transpiring over the course of time. I can look at this via a line chart, and I can even hover over those to get the exact dollar values attributed in each of those time horizons. And in this case, each monthly bucket of the last 12 months. Next area in spend profile. So we had details of the aggregate top-down view of the spend. We had compare with 2 dimensions of the data to see that overlaid. The trending module also has a lot of visualization power. We're able to look at 2 non-consecutive points in time that I'd like to see compared to my spend data. Now, what would this look like in practice? Let's say I want to look at Q1 of 23 versus Q1 of 22. This would be a great area to start when looking at that analysis request. To do so, in the top right-hand side, you'll see you have a date selector. This is an area that is distinct from the date picker. Once again, in the particular module for compare, you'll see this date selector is distinct from what we have in the date picker at the top of the screen. That's because I can specify I'd only like to look at a single quarter, so I can click and drag that down to that particular range of time. I'll do the same thing over here. I want to look at 1 quarter range of time. When I click and drag, I'm looking before I actually commit it. I see January of 23 through March for both of my time horizons. Before I even lock this in, you'll notice we have $57 million in difference in those 2 points in time. That increase looks like a 57 million calculated in the bottom right. When I click apply, rapidly you'll see SpendHQ now brings these 2 points of visualization here for my view. And this is a really good point to reemphasize. Those power filters can always be very handy tools you have in your back pocket. Because as you build out those areas that are important for your own analysis and work, I can quickly toggle that on. Now I have that small campus subset. This will overlay under that quarter-to-quarter comparison. And look at that, we see we have very, very similar spend. It looks like 121 versus 122 in that Q1 range. And my supply base has been relatively consistent, although we have increased with 181 new vendors in that time. Let's scroll a bit further down and start getting down to what this data really shows. While we can still use those category and subcategory slicers that exist in many areas of SpendHQ, I personally find myself using the bottom of the screen often in this module because this helps me understand where the changes are taking place and hone in on what's important for my analysis. Here I can see we have construction equipment, unaddressable, real estate and facilities, all the big drivers. In fact, I can even use my data table over here by saying, I want to look at the largest points of variance from an increase perspective. And immediately say, well, interesting, utilities moved up by just about $4 million in those 3 campuses in that period of time. 93% increase in that horizon. Well, let's go get 1 layer deeper. Click on utilities. We'll see the breakdown there of electricity, water and sewer, and natural gas. We're up across the board with electricity far and away the major driver. I can go back 1 additional layer, select electricity, and now you can really get a perspective where PG&E has really had a substantial jump. Looks like 252% in those 3 campuses in that quarter-to-quarter comparison. You, of course, can still gravitate towards individual vendors very rapidly on a separate basis when I drill into that 1 segment. But this is a great use case of being able to see where's my biggest variances, where are the biggest drivers, and where do I, as a member of the procurement team, likely need to start focusing efforts to really make sure we're keeping our costs in check. In the bottom left-hand side, once again, you do have the ability to export this via CSV and Excel. So these are all the visualizations that exist at top line there in the spend profile. We went through details, compare, and trending. Let's go back over to our categories module, which we saw a little taste of earlier when we went there from our home screen, going to the categories overview. Now, the categories overview is a wonderful way of seeing all dollars. This gives us every single subcategory and category, but that also means there's an awful lot of data being displayed here. I'm going to zoom this in. I apologize, as zoom's not the best way to sometimes see this because there's just so much data being displayed. But what this lets you see is each of our largest categories, followed by the largest to smallest subcategories in each of these verticals. A really powerful way of seeing your data. I'd also like to note that each user has the ability to favorite what they'd also always like to be able to see in this category breakdown. As I highlight a couple of these little star icons, you can turn this very, very massive list into a much smaller list that's more digestible for what's important for your view, just by favoriting those subcategories. I also want to call out that little manage skittle will mean that we do have a contract in place based on some data we received from the team during our implementation. This means that at least one vendor in that subcategory is a preferred supplier, or namely has a contract that's currently engaged with their spend. So this means we do have some contractual obligations that have been signed if we have that managed skittle also visualized. I did also want to mention we have this fragmentation heat map. This gives you perspective of change of spend, and I do like this little eye icon, kind of hard to see here on the Zoom portal, but this gives you perspective of subcategories with a very small subset of spend versus subcategories that have a huge level of spend from a count of vendors. So if we have 1 or 2 suppliers, you'll see them in red. If we see them across 50 or more, you'll see them in that orange coloration. I personally very much like the spend heat map, as this gives perspective of change over time as well. This is telling me at a top view, here's categories and subcategories that have a 10% increase in red, or if they've decreased by 10%, they're going to be in that green color. So it looks like my furniture spend is decreased by a meaningful percentage in that time horizon. Always remember, these data sets that you're looking at in the automatic calculation are based on the criteria you've specified in the tool. So that power filter is still alive. If I click on that power icon, this will have to recalculate and regenerate based on the full data as opposed to just those 3 campuses we were visualizing earlier. The same rule will also apply for your date picker, and always know that SpendHQ is looking at the comparable period of time prior. So that means for the August through July 22-23, we are then looking at the prior 12 months to that range when going through this calculation process of the spend heat map or any other area SpendHQ calculating values. You'll see here if there is not a coloration listed, so that means it is just in that white color, means it is actually directionally very similar. So effectively my HVAC R spend is very flat, has not moved by that overall 20% calculation process in that view. If I want to look at one area of spend, I can select it. You'll see it does highlight with that blue box around that segment. I can click open in the bottom right-hand side, which will give me that view of this particular procurement level subcategory, much like we saw earlier. And always note, you can use those dimensions to specify other views in that data. So if I want to have my compare by dimension when looking at building construction as campus, see that all broken down here very, very rapidly. You can add that as a compliance or supplier view if you do have preferred vendors in that space. If I go to compliance view, you'll notice that we do not have preferred vendors at least at the top 10 cases of the campuses. And we also have my spend fragmentation. This tells me that 7 vendors make up over 50% of my spend. The next 14 now encompass a full 80%. So my tail spend effectively for that 80-20, we've got 214 vendors in the building construction space, making up that last 20% of spend. You can also break down what that average spend looks like per supplier. And what I also really like about this, you can specify based on your own user credentials where you'd like to have your visualizations. I might like to have my spend fragmentation always front and center. Just go ahead and click and drag it. That'll be part of how you visualize that data going forward. Going a little further down, you also have perspective, those same slicers that you can set for different visualizations. Maybe you want to see your data sources, where that spend is coming from. Perhaps you also want to see your departments. All of these allow for that visualization and layering that you can pull directly out of the tool super quickly. At the bottom of the screen too, you'll see the perspective of those top vendors. And I can even see we have 8 new suppliers here in this segment with 32 gainers. That means they've grown by more than 50% and 19 decliners. All this data at the top of this particular billboard also correlate directly with what we see here in my data table. So here, like PM Construction and Griffith, these are new vendors with over $1 million to spend. Very likely a candidate for procurement to get some details of what's going on in this construction project and make sure that these are being handled the right way against the existing supplier base. We also see my gainers, flipping over here to my gainers, seeing those very large increases of spend. So it looks like our largest gainer, DPR Construction General, has over 100% increase, now at $63 million in that particular 12-month period. I do want to lastly call out that favorite. So if you do favorite vendors, they will also flow through over here. And if there are preferred suppliers, you'll also have this little P notated when you go to preferred. So this is our categories module. We saw that top line view overview, then drill down to one individual category. Let's move over here to our suppliers module, which we already got a taste of with Clark Construction, and talk through some other visualizations here. Now, the suppliers module is where we are seeing perspective of the normalization that SpendHQ's already gone through for the team. In this case, in the past 12 months, there were just over 250,000 original vendor names we saw in your raw data. We've normalized that down to just about 50,000 unique vendor names. So this means like Fed-X, Fed/X, Fed_X, all those different iterations your raw data may contain. We're going through that normalization process on our side to ensure that when you look for a vendor, all the spend's been aggregated in an appropriate manner. It's also an area in the eye icon on the top right. You can see that we're, of course, normalizing and providing perspective of that effort. We also see perspective on the top right, those supply-based changes. In fact, this is very similar to that categories module view, but now we're looking at the top all spend as opposed to just one subcategory. Let's use some of the drill downs in the center of the screen to see how the other elements update very rapidly here in SpendHQ. We see we have my categories and subcategories, so a reoccurring theme and view that we had from earlier. Clicking that drop down, you'll see we, of course, populate very rapidly. I'm going to look at my corporate spend here in this case. Then with one click, you'll see all my data updates, 240,000 or 24,000 OVNs going down to 791 unique vendors. And I can also see at the bottom of the screen, my vendor base is updated appropriately. I personally like to recommend getting more comfortable with those slicers. Campus is what we're using a lot in today's demonstration, but notice I can now look at my corporate spend, looking at all my subcategories underneath corporate, viewing by campus specifically. I can see from a view, where is this really being routed out towards? Looks like USPS, we can see is very fragmented as I would totally expect. Everyone's using USPS. And I can even click on USPS to see additional details from a top-down view. This is also where you'll be able to see how many different name variations do I have for a given vendor. Well, in this case, we've normalized 94 different versions of USPS. If I click that eye icon on the top right-hand side, this will be where you're able to see all those various versions of how USPS is showing up in your raw data. To get back to where I was, just go back to your overview, and you'll see that slicer, the top view, once again is returned. My call out that I'd like to make before going to the next section here is that those updates in the supply-based change once again correlate to my data table at the bottom of the screen. So let's look back at small parcel shipping, for example. I know I want to look at one area of spend. You can type in small parcel over here. And my subcategory drill down. Here we see my UPS, FedEx as in my top of those two sections. And we can see I have one gainer in this segment. If I want to look at that one subset, click on gainers, and you'll see ePost Global has increased by 352% in the past 12 months. Wow, meaningful increase. Now we have 250,000 spend here in the past 12 months. It's really helpful for you to be able to slice down your spend and really get a good handle of what's going on across all of CSU or even more campus specific, depending on your needs and use cases. In this case, I can hover over it and it looks like this is all coming from Northridge and a little bit from San Diego State. So moving on from our suppliers module, seeing how we can go from the top-down view into individual segments, I want to spend some time here in the compliance module as well. Now we have just about 10 minutes or so left in today's first of 2 training sessions of the basics. Now, what does the compliance module really house? Well, compliance is all things about that managed spend we were talking about earlier. Once again, that definition, when we think about managed spend, means at least one vendor in that procurement level subcategory is flagged as preferred or has a contract currently in place. That tells us that is managed spend. Compliance spend, on the other hand, is spend actually occurring or transpiring with those preferred vendors. So you'll see the managed spend will always be greater than compliance spend. We have $2 billion in managed spend, and we have $375 million of compliance spend based on the currently provided information. We can also see at the top of the screen that impactable spend, and this is where that unaddressable definition we talked about earlier also takes a little bit of a note, as we are automatically taking out those unaddressable areas. So the unimpactable areas of spend are being removed from that number to give you perspective of the impactable spend. What I like about this compliance module is all these views. As I scroll a bit further down, give them a category to subcategory view of where we have compliance, where it's really increasing or decreasing. In this case, I can see my real estate and facilities has a 10% increase in the most recent 12 months versus the prior. If I click on that area of spend, notice everything updates throughout this whole module. It makes it very easy for me to see where that's making big shifts. Or see how when we look at food services, so we have a very strong compliance rate there. We can jump in and see the Chartwells and Compass are by far the 2 largest, and those are the currently preferred suppliers in that segment. I'll also call out, while we're looking at the overview here, we have individual module subviews for just the managed, unmanaged views as well. So don't need to go through the same information twice, but if you're looking only at those subcategories that do have at least one preferred supplier, the managed is a great submodule to utilize. It has even better visualizations for that subset. Same, of course, goes for your unmanaged, where we do not have any preferred suppliers at all flagged in these subcategories. And lastly, we have the Rogues Gallery, which is an automatically detailed view of that spend data of where those biggest areas of opportunity may be. This is automatically generated by SpendHQ based on the inputs of what we see for your preferred suppliers and the largest areas that can be impacted should they be followed based on any of these various dimensions. And of course, you could very easily flip these to various different views from those top right-hand sides of modules to help perspectives of increasing and driving higher compliance across the organization. The last thing just to talk through on compliance is that your admins will have the ability to go into the tools area of this view where they can drop in their expected savings rate if you were to go out to market in one of these procurement level subcategories. They can also specify what is impactable and what they want to include in that automatic savings calculation in SpendHQ. We default these views of consistent indirect subcategories we've seen across many of our other projects, but this is another area your admins can also kind of pop in, make some tweaks if appropriate to what those savings rates may be. So that's our compliance module. I'm going to navigate over here to the documents module, so where contracts can also be dropped into SpendHQ. Nothing really to talk through in this area, as it just is a nice view of how those documents can also flow through. But I believe you also already have this in your PPM instance, so that's really where I expect those to be housed, as opposed to here on the SI side or the Spend Intelligence side. The strategy module will be addressing in the more detailed analytics advanced training this upcoming Thursday, alongside the analytics module. So these are 2 areas of additional power, a lot more nuance, a lot more customization that can be viewed here in these 2 sections, but we will not be discussing those here in our initial training session. But I do want to hop over here to my insights module. So a little bit further down here on my module navigation pane. Now, what does the insights module contain? These are going to be automatically viewed instances, so large areas of change over time, perhaps vendors that have really seen a meaningful increase or decrease based on both hooks in the data, but also honing in on what's really occurring across all the data sets. If I scroll a bit further down, this has me with both gainers, decliners, compliance shifts over the course of time. I can see here, at a top line view, 79 vendors have increased 100% spend increase in my compliance space without rogue vendors. So these are areas that might be worthy of drilling into. Well, how do we drill into those? Well, if I click on any of those insights in this module, it's a great way for you to be able to see what's going on and transpiring in that period of time. So here, if I go to my rogue supplier spend, I now have that subset of vendors that met that particular criteria. And once again, you're always able to visualize that additional dimension hook. This lets you see where this spend is really transpiring, maybe what departments are actually seeing this spend transact against with Aztec shops. If I click on department name, it will then bring that additional layer as you're starting to slice through that spend data. Notice when using the Insights submodule, you also have the ability to compare or look at variances. So really the difference between that particular dimension. You have both at your fingertips you're able to utilize when slicing through this information. If I want to look at that information too, you hover over it, and you'll see what that spend is actually related towards when hovering on each of those verticals. If I want to look at an individual vendor as well, notice you can click on each of those and it will gravitate towards what's going on in that particular area of your insight you drilled into. To go back to that full list, you can go back over to Insights, and always note when you're going back to Insights, you can then queue up others you'd like to view as you're looking at different segments of your spend. You'll also see here in the top right-hand side, if there's only particular insights that you're oftentimes visualizing that are more important for your use case, by all means, please deselect those that you don't want to see and leave that defaulted. This will be user specific, so it will only give you the insights that you prefer to visualize here in this particular area of the tool. Now, as the last areas I'd also like to call out in our earlier baseline training, please remember in the top right-hand side, it looks like a question mark. That's a little help icon that will bring you back to the support platform. And it will queue up actually a whole new tab, just like we saw earlier. This is a great area for you to always be referencing for how the system is working. If you need to submit a ticket or encountering any issues, a great home is, of course, right here directly in the tool. The knowledge base can be activated directly through here, which is going to be your user manual with much more of the written and detailed components of how the SpendHQ platform is interacted with. And I cannot recommend enough, if you'd like to sign up for additional trainings, we had that function right here. We hold trainings, I believe, every 2 weeks, live trainings with our support team, if there's other areas you'd also like to get perspective of. Certainly know we covered a lot of information here in the past hour. We have just about 2 minutes left. So before we wrap up, Bess, want to check if there's any questions we can also field before our first of 2 trainings wraps up.
Thank you, Brandon. Okay, yes, we've got 4 Q&A questions. So the first is from Devana. Is SpendHQ live and loaded on the contracts and procurement site? I think David wanted to answer.
So it is live. If you have access to it using the URL to log in. I have not updated the pages on contract service and procurement website to reflect any of the new training. So all the old Jagger stuff will be removed and replaced with the new SpendHQ information, but that has not taken place yet. But yes, it is live.
Okay, thank you. Yuri is asking, how does it work for a shared department dashboard? Can everyone make changes? Are some users view only, or depends on whatever access rights granted by manager of the dashboard?
So if we're talking about analytics dashboard creation, we'll be covering that in detail on Thursday. But as far as visualizing subsets of the data, that can all be controlled in that power filter. So if there's an interest of certain users having smaller elements of data being visualized, they can control that through the power filter function to point that at certain departments, certain campuses, really whatever that slicer is, they can refine that for a restricted by power filter if necessary.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, how far back will imported historical data go as we get started in 2024?
Yes, so we have spend data going all the way back to the beginning of 2020, and that will only increase in volume. So you'll always have access to that spend data through 2020, and we'll continue to add to that with actually next week marking the catch-up of spend all the way through January of 2024.
Great. And last but not least, will you go over how to download and convert the current view to Excel?
I absolutely will. That's one of my first and favorite topics with the analytics and advanced training we'll be having on Thursday.
Great. Thanks, Brandon.
Great.
No further questions.
It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to this initial training session. Thank you all for joining, and we'll be reconvening here in 2 days for the follow-up for some of the more advanced analytic functionalities here of the platform.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Great. Thank you all.
Thanks all.